with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Joy and let her introduce herself and talk about the excellent presentation that she has for us today. So thank you, Joy, for taking some time out to do this again for us.
Well, you're very welcome. And I am not tech savvy. So hopefully that will not become woefully apparent with some sort of catastrophic tech disaster on my end. But please, and I don't even see the chat bar stuff. So I can see Bill's face. So if there's some sort of crisis and folks can't see the slides or hear the narration, please just let Bill know and then he can flag me down. So at any rate, we are talking about livestock guardian dogs, specifically their use with poultry. This is something that is super duper important right now, very, very timely. I don't know the demographics of anyone who is signed on to this, but so I'm just going to be very, very frank about things. But what we are seeing in my area in North Carolina are lots and lots of folks getting into keeping poultry, a phenomenon that happened during the pandemic. People could keep their sourdough starter alive. And so then that's the new gateway drug to ag. And then they got into poultry keeping, and all of the wildlife held a committee meeting just inside the tree line and was like, look, these people have put together a buffet. So of course, all the wildlife coming after the poultry means that everyone rushed right out and got one of these over romanticized, super benevolent, big, fluffy white dogs. And now the pandemic is over and things are shifting. People are realizing how difficult they are, and our shelters are swamped. We do a lot of rescue here and we cannot keep up. So getting dogs working with poultry successfully is of such paramount importance, because that seems to be primarily what folks want them to do these days. And unfortunately, this is not exactly what the dogs were originally designed to do. So it takes more patience, more diligence, more consistency, more work, more wine, maybe. I don't know how that works for most of y'all, but to get these dogs through this. So we are Providence Farm. We are 20 acres as part of a much larger family farm that's been in my husband's family since 1795. We are just outside of a metropolitan area, but we have a major stream to the east of us and another major stream to the west of us, and lots of water sources on our farm and around our farm. So we see lots of predator activity. It's a beautiful part of the state, west of Raleigh, just east of Greensboro, lots and lots of woods and rolling terrain. And on this farm, we raise an obscene amount of poultry using the livestock guardian dogs, which is why I'm here talking about this. We do Tamworth hogs in the forest. We have a herd of miniature dairy goats that we milk. We have 3 different breeds of heritage breed sheep, retired show horses that are going to probably bankrupt us. Even though they're retired and old, they just get more expensive. And we sell pasture raised meat at a local farmer's market. We also have a certified roadside farm market here at the farm that we're not really staffing right now because we're staying busy enough with the markets. Post-pandemic, the markets have opened up. So chicken is our primary breadwinner around here. People have a really hard time finding it in the stores that they feel like is consumable. So we do thousands of birds here on the farm from start to finish. We process everything here on the farm as well. And it is a regenerative system. So we don't use any kind of pesticides or herbicides, and we are predator friendly, no lethal methods of predator control. And it is a regenerative system. So we are constantly moving flocks and herds around on our 20 acres. And so given the number of birds that we have free ranging all the time, we had to put something in place for predator control, and that was going to be effective. And sitting outside all the time at night waiting to pop off something that's coming in, I don't have time for that. I can't stay awake that much. So the dogs were sort of the next answer. So we do all of this in the presence of the usual suspects. So I left this photo of the domestic dogs really large for sort of a reason. Everybody worries about wildlife. Wildlife is risk averse and behaves very, very differently from domestic dogs. Domestic dogs will get inside your electronet. They will come inside your coop areas, whatever it is that you are using to contain your birds, and they will cause more damage in less time. And it is wanton, destructive damage. They're not even just stealing a chicken to run off back to the den or, eat it in the yard and then fly away. They're just killing to kill. And people don't think about domestic dogs as being like a number one predator of poultry, but depending on your location, they absolutely are. And if they don't operate from a risk averse perspective, so we manage them very differently. So we do this with what I call the Fabulous Five. We're actually down to a permanent pack of 4 dogs. The dog in the bottom middle, her name was Stella. We'll talk a little bit more about her in a minute, but she is no longer part of the permanent pack. We have 3 different breeds represented here. We have your standard big white dog with the Pyrenees that tend to be less reactive and a little softer. Our old lady Anatolian matriarch is sort of the brains behind the operation and glues it all together. Very, very wise dog. Having a mentor dog to help raise up your puppies is priceless. And then we have our young Karakachan, he's now 3 years old. We call him David Banner because he has 0 fuse and he is always ready to turn into the Incredible Hulk. He has 0 tolerance for anything strange, whether it is people, domestic dogs, predators, doesn't matter. He is not having it. So we've got sort of 3 different levels of reactivity within our pack. And as part of the livestock guardian dog presence on this farm, we also do quite a bit of rescue. So right now, for example, I have a 5-year-old Anatolian that is here. He will be leaving to go to his new home on Sunday, and he will be replaced by an adolescent Anatolian Pyrenees cross who's coming here to get worked up to guard poultry and everything else. And then he will be placed into a new home. So our Fabulous 4, as it is now, it is something that everyone in our community loves to see. Some of our dogs sort of have this fan club following, and people just always, oh, we love the dogs. We love the dogs. We are thinking about getting a dog because we got chickens. And I always say to them, do you really need the dog? And I probably spend more time talking people off the ledge of diving in and getting a livestock guardian dog to guard their poultry, because they really don't understand the commitment that it takes to get a puppy to finish working status, or the fact that there are so many other options that don't require vet bills every year, or food all the time, or fencing for itself to keep it in place. So I'm always saying to people, do not get the livestock guardian dog unless you have tried all these other things. And so here's all these other things. First and foremost, go out to the perimeter of your property or your poultry area and install some fladry. This can be something as simply as old baling twine with Paw Paw's nasty, sweaty, disgusting t-shirt torn into shreds and tied to that line. We use that, and we not so much use that anymore because we have graduated to solar Christmas tree lights with an 8-way blinking system on them. That way, I can go down to the perimeter fences where the predators are pushing through the hardest, and I can change the blink pattern. Having the dogs here, people might say, well, why do you even need to do that? It just keeps the habitat destabilized from the perspective of the predator, and then the dogs don't have to work so hard. So try the fladry. If you've tried the fladry and that hasn't worked, have you also tried these predator eyeball lights that you can order off of Amazon and hang in the trees? Put on fence posts and T-posts out around your perimeter, the perimeter of your property, or within a reasonable distance of where you're housing your chickens. These have proven to be pretty effective in some cases, depending on the predator load. There is a farmer in the low country of South Carolina who swears by these things. She raises thousands and thousands and thousands of chickens in the woods, and she does not have permanent livestock guardian dogs. They have some shepherd type dogs on the property, but nothing that lives in with the poultry all the time. So fladry, the predator eyeball lights, hot wire. I'm always amazed that people have not tried to do some sort of hot wire around the outside of their poultry enclosures or their fields where they're keeping poultry. You can do several strands of bare hot wire, offset a couple of those strands so that a predator would have to navigate through it, and use a larger box than this. Wet the area down around your ground rods, make sure it's really well grounded. Figure out where you want to hang some education bacon on that wire, pour some water on that, hang the bacon on it. At the end of the day, let the predators come in to grab the bacon and learn that the fence bites back. And that can be a very effective predator deterrent. The other thing is about just a battery operated radio. And you need to move that around, put it inside some kind of weather, or have a weather resistant radio, whatever you need to do for wherever you need to put it, but move it around. Because again, the goal here is to make the habitat, the ecosystem where you are keeping your poultry, not feel very dependable, because predators are going to operate from a risk averse perspective. If it's too risky to come get those chickens, then they're going to shop elsewhere for a meal. So let's say that you've tried all of that and your predator load is such that none of that is working. So you got to get a plan. So here's your plan. This is your poultry protection starter kit. So this is our Karakachan when he was just a wee little guy. Just a couple of notes about this. If you are starting off with a puppy and you do not have a mentor dog to raise that puppy up, get that puppy when they are 12 weeks old to do your poultry work. You get a puppy that has learned additional job skills from their parents and their siblings. Get an 8-week-old puppy if there's no poultry on the property where the poultry is coming from. If all the siblings are gone, if there's no livestock, if the parents aren't great with poultry, okay, get an 8-week-old puppy. An 8-week-old puppy is going to be small enough that your roosters and some of your other poultry is going to actually be pretty effective at disciplining it. But you've got to make sure that that dog goes out with that poultry from day one. You're going to try to bond this dog to that poultry like you would sheep or goats, even though the dogs are not going to bond to the poultry, which I know that sounds totally crazy, but we'll get back to it. So, always start with one puppy. I know that it's very popular for everyone to start with 2 puppies. And people say, oh, well, they work better, when they're together. Well, and that assumes that they're working. I feel very, very strongly about this, having taught middle school, having been a middle schooler, having had a child of my own who was a toddler and a middle schooler. If you want to take a pair of puppies and put them in with poultry, a lot of times what you will end up with are dogs that are not bonded. They're not going to bond to the poultry in the same way. And you're going to end up with these dogs that are behaving like cranky toddlers or recalcitrant middle schoolers, and they are going to feed off of one another's bad behavior. And nobody's actually working. They're just harassing what they're supposed to be guarding, or they're leaving, or they become codependent. And then if it's 2 girls, maybe they decide at some point in time that they hate each other and they're going to start fighting. So just start with one puppy. Just trust me on this. It's going to make your poultry life a whole lot easier. So you've got one puppy. What breed do you get? Breed doesn't necessarily matter that much as far as who's going to be better at guarding poultry. You determine the breed that you're going to get based on other factors. Are you in a really hot climate? You might want to consider something like an Anatolian with the shorter coat, or an Akbash. If you're in a colder climate, you get something with a heavier coat. If you have a whole lot of people traffic, do not try and use a Central Asian Shepherd or Sarplaninac or something that is really stranger reactive to do this work for you. If you have lots of domestic dogs, you might want to reconsider having a Pyrenees. Some Pyrenees tend to be very, very reactive about strange dogs and strange people, others not. So individual dog temperament figures in heavily. But soundness is super duper important. And so we've got on here mental and physical soundness. So let's talk about Stella, the dead dog, for just a couple of seconds. So when I told you we had a pack of 5 and it has recently become a pack of 4, and I wish I had a more interesting slide for y'all to look at. Stella was a dog that was not mentally sound. She got worse and worse and worse as she got older. She was a product of some poor breeding, backyard genetics, no one taking into consideration what each parent was bringing to the table in the way of genetics. And she was just a total disaster. And so all of that time that we spent working on that dog just comes to no good, and you're not ever going to get your time back. You can always go out and get another dog, but you're never, ever, ever going to get your time back. So make sure that you are getting a dog that is physically and mentally sound. We always recommend to folks, make sure the parents are health tested. A dog that is not physically and mentally sound cannot do the work, and you are always going to be frustrated. So you wouldn't use a Prius to tow your stock trailer. Get the right tool for the job. So go with an ethical breeder and start there, and let that breeder help you put the right dog on your farm to do your work. So this is more discussion about Stella, the village idiot. Here she's wearing a dangle and she's got a deer leg. And this dog was actually a behavioral euthanasia this past Monday because she just could not function normally. And we can talk about that more later. And some of the things that we saw with her, the balling up of the stock, the running down of animals, the panic, the noise aversion. If you have a dog that is averse to gunfire, fireworks, loud noises, do yourself a favor and find another situation for that dog. If they are panicking and running away, they are not watching over your stock or your poultry. So genetics count. Again, ethical breeder, much more important than actual breed of livestock guardian dog, so long as it's a livestock guardian dog breed. And just remember, you can pour every bit of perfect effort into bad genetics. You will never train those genetics away, and you will never, ever get your time back from everything that you pour into trying to make a round peg fit into a square hole. So that is super important. Back again, just a repeat of the thing. Mental soundness is super important. All right. So livestock guardian dogs do not bond to poultry the same way that they're going to bond to your sheep or your goats. They don't get a lot of comfort out of it. When you've got your puppy and you bring your puppy home and you put them into a stall with the sheep or next to the sheep and they cuddle up next to the sheep, that's not how poultry sort of works. Poultry may get to the point where they're climbing all over your dogs. But if you are cycling out a bunch of broilers and you're cycling broilers out every 7 to 8 weeks, these animals are not really forming a bond with your dog and your dog not with them. They're more guarding space. So here's one of our Pyrenees with these lambs. He knows these lambs from the time that they are born. He knows their parents. This is his family. They don't look at poultry the same way. So the poultry gets guarded by default. Either it's in the same area as the livestock that the guardian dog is guarding, and you basically train the guardian up to ignore the poultry. And then the dog says, oh, okay, well, this is part of the landscape around here. You know, this is just an accessory. I'm going to be fine with it. But you're not going to have that same bond. And I kind of cannot say that enough. People say, oh, my dogs love my chickens. It's not the same. I mean, we've got dogs that are out with all of this menagerie, and the poultry is guarded just as much as everything else. But if I remove all of the goats and all of the sheep, this is our chaotic barnyard, the dogs are not super quick to rush out and guard up. And that's one of our biggest predator issues when we have birds that are free ranging, are raptors, hawks. We have a lot of osprey here, but we don't really see them as a threat. They've never been a bother to the birds, but the red-tailed hawks have been. If there's no other stock out in the barnyard outside of the birds, some of the dogs do not go out and guard up. They just don't. So it's easier if you have your birds in with other stock. But here's your quick and dirty plan for how you're going to make up your dog. So let's say you get your 10 to 12-week-old puppy, and you're going to keep that puppy in with the poultry, directly in with the poultry, as long as possible. That might be 5 days. That might be 5 weeks. It might be 5 months. It is on you to be observant and make sure that you are adjusting on the fly to ensure that the puppy does not start looking at the birds as some sort of squawky, flappy, fun toy, or something to resource guard. And birds are fragile. So when the puppy gets to be like too overzealous and it gets to a certain size, the bird doesn't stand a chance. Even if the puppy's not being aggressive, the bird just doesn't stand a chance. So as long as that puppy can stay in there, here's a picture of Joe. He was in with these birds probably until he was about, I don't know, 9 to 10 months old. And then he got a wild hair and started making very poor decisions. And so he went on a tether in with the birds. So the birds could get away from him, but he could not get to them. So between the time when the puppy starts getting a little overzealous, and then you might say, well, I could do a tether. The other option here, and this is my first go-to, is to always do the adjacent pen or a pen within the pen. So your puppy is going to be pinned up either inside an area with the birds where they're sharing a fence line, or the puppy is going to be next to them. So you restrict access to the birds, and understand that birds are sometimes suicidal and they make very, very poor life decisions. These Cornish crosses in here are not flying up to do anything, but a laying hen that can fly up, they will sometimes fly up and into the dog's pen to get dog kibble or whatever. And then the dog gets them, the adolescent dog gets them. So your goal during this stage is keep the dog from harming the chickens, but also give the chickens a way to get away, but also consider, if you're going to do a pen within the pen or an adjacent pen, putting a top or something, some angled fencing across the fence, the shared fence line, so that you can prevent those birds from doing stupid stuff as well, because they don't really have a whole lot of self-preservation. So here you see, this is just another shot of sort of this idea of the pen next to the pen. This is not really chicken specific, but on the left side of this gate that we've got bolted between the post here and the barn wall, there's birds over there, could be birds over there, and then your dog would be over on the other side of that. It's the same idea as what you would use when you're bonding your livestock guardian dog to your sheep or your goats and you're doing a shared fence line. We love using hog panel, and sometimes stacked hog panel, so we can make it taller, so that those, and then restricting the space that those animals have. So the dog cannot leave the presence of the poultry cannot leave the presence of the dog. These are 12 by 12 sections, about the size of a horse stall. And so it limits their ability to get away from one another. So it sort of forces them to coexist in the same airspace. So this is just another view of that. You can see we've got gates hung all across the front of this, and we can kind of move things around. So we would have the birds over on one side locked in here, and then the dog over on the other side. So I am honestly not seeing all of this space here, all of the wording that's on this slide, but so again, the pen within the pen, you can do what we call moat guarding around here. A lot of people do this with Electronet. Let me see if we've got a slide of that. Nope. So the Electronet is something that a lot of poultry folks are using. And what you can do, it's a little expensive, but what you can do if you don't have permanent fencing is you do 2 sets of Electronet. You put your birds in the inner section, and then your dogs are going to be in an outer section. So you would have even more than double the fence requirement for it, but you literally just create a moat around your poultry. Your poultry's in the center, and then your dog has the outside area that it can guard and stop predators, but it does not have access to the birds. So this can be something that people actually start with and then stick with. For example, they go and they get a dog and they're going to make it up to do poultry work, but then the dog shows absolutely zero interest in guarding the poultry and every interest in unaliving the poultry. But maybe they don't have the money or the interest in replacing the dog. So they do this setup where the dog just hangs out in that moat around the poultry and keeps the poultry safe. And the presence of the dog, even though it's not in with the poultry, will also affect the behavior of aerial predators like hawks, and keep them away from that. This is Hazel, by the way, hanging out on her picnic table. This is one of our hoop style houses that we will put broilers in, and then sometimes we will have layers in that as well. We are really fortunate to have Hazel. She just lives out with the birds all the time. And the birds only go in the tractor when we first move them out there, so that she has a few days to go, oh, okay, it's my new set of birds. These are mine to guard now. Okay, I got it. So that they sort of, again, become part of the environment. And she just ignores the birds. So at the onset of the idiot adolescence, and it is rare that you have a dog that does not go through this period of adolescence. And sometimes it lasts for 100 years, or it feels like 100 years. And you think to yourself, is this dog ever going to like settle down around the poultry? Is it ever going to quit doing stupid things? Yes, probably. And the reason I say yes, probably is that with poultry, some of them never, ever make up to work poultry dependably. They may be good 90% of the time, and then every so often you find a dead bird. Some of them are never, ever going to make up to poultry even 90% of the time. But when they hit this period of adolescence, which you're generally talking about 6 months, maybe up even to like 2.5 years, it just depends on the dog. Make sure that you have a pen within the pen, a pen adjacent to your birds. And in addition to that, teach your dog to tether. Tethering is one of these things that in a lot of areas has become outlawed. Like we have an ordinance in the county that I'm in that's an anti-tethering ordinance, and we get written up and we get citations for it and whatever. And we've had animal control called on us so many times, and I pull out the right to farm law, and they've never ever seen it. So we do a little bit of education, and they leave and go on to something that's more important than writing me a citation for not violating their ordinance. But teach your dog how to be tethered quietly. That way you can tether the dog to your coop, to your mobile house, to a stake in the ground, so long as they've got shade and food and water and the birds can get away from them. This is a great way for the dog to have to learn to chill out and be quiet and deal with life. And that life being one of being in the midst of all this poultry and not unaliving the poultry. So this is a female Crackachan that's owned by some friends of ours, little ways over in Chapel Hill. She is, just a side note here, she has low guardian duties. She came out of a breeding program that unfortunately there was no health testing, and she developed some pretty significant health problems. And so she's not physically able to do heavy duty guarding, but she has become really pretty dependable here in with the broilers. And you can see the premier fencing there. She, again, she's pretty dependable now, but she has been tethered to various things inside that poultry area. And that poultry area is something that it's different given whatever time of the season they are in raising out their birds. So the whole thing is mobile. They may take that and shift it to another side of the farm or shift it, 50 feet over. The other thing that's in here that might just kind of be interesting to note, and some people feel like this is an acceptable solution, some people are adamantly opposed to it, is the idea of a drag. So the tire that is in there right now, Kali is tethered to that tire. So that way she can move if she needs to, but it is going to require a significant amount of effort from her to move. So some people are into that. Some people are not. I'm not even going to address it. I think some dogs, it is dangerous because they are going to drag it up to the fence, jump over the fence, hang themselves, not be able to get the tire over, or whatever it is you've tethered them to. And then other dogs, it is a good fit. So, but I'm going to leave that kind of where it is there. So here's just another image of her. She's got her tire there. The birds are kind of hanging out around her. This was pulled out of a video, and in the video, which I couldn't get it to load on here because, again, not tech savvy, but the birds are all being very calm around her. Even though she's clearly mobile at that moment, the birds are not panicking and trying to like dart away from her. So she has progressed enough in her training from the pen next to the chicken area to a pen within the chicken area to being tethered to a permanent or semi-permanent structure to then being on the drag. And that's sufficient for her at this point in the training to keep her from being able to run down a bird. So when you do a tether, and this is one of our hoop houses, and this is a dog tethered to the hoop house, and you can see where the chickens have their water and the chickens can get away. I always recommend to folks that you do a chain. Do not use something that the dog can chew through. I think that would sometimes be kind of self-explanatory, but I don't think I think people regularly underestimate what a determined dog will chew through to leave. So we always recommend a chain tether. The benefit of the chain is that you can make it as long or as short as you need to, and you can make adjustments to that pretty easily with additional hardware. It's not going to wrap around like a cable does. It's just sturdier. It's got a little weight to it, so that if you do have an exuberant adolescent, that it sort of does remind the dog, hey now, you've got something attached. You don't go doinging and bounding over into the chickens. Make sure that you've got shelter that includes wind protection and shade, and something that will keep the rain off. And the snow off of them, especially if you have road frontage. Oh my gosh, if you have road frontage and you are, whether you're tethering the dog or not, please, please, please do yourself a favor and make sure that your chicken housing, if the dog cannot fit into the chicken housing, that you have something else out there that is dog housing, because somebody will see it and somebody will call if they feel like your dog is not being, it does not have any kind of shelter. And just to reiterate, the chickens, the poultry, the ducks, the turkeys, whatever it is that you're trying to get the dog to guard, they have to be able to get away from the dog, and they have to be able to access their own food and shelter. So with this, you see the dog over here on one side of the hoop house, and the door is open, but what you don't see is we've got another little door that's cut into the hog panel and the chicken wire on the other side of this house. And I don't know, you might be able to see it, but I've got something from the Zoom meeting here stacked up in front of the photo. And that way the birds can go in and out that way. That way, if the dog gets up and comes into the front door and the birds are in there and the dog gets silly, the birds just scoot out that little side door. So again, I always think about plan for the absolute worst, hope for the best, plan for the worst, and don't underestimate the crazy things these dogs can do. So then we're going to start working the dog among the birds that are free ranging around. So we're going to take the dog off of the tether, and we're going to start off with a leash. I like to just use like a horse lead line. It's got some weight to it. It generally has like a dependable snap. I tie knots into that lead line as stops. That way I have old lady hands and they hurt most of the time from arthritis. And so that just kind of gives me a nice little stop. If the dog jumps up or darts after something, that I can kind of stop the dog and just stand my ground. And then once you start taking that dog into the chickens on that lead line, you're going to be saying to the dog, okay, settle, and you kind of ignore the dog settles, you say, good dog. And then maybe you move to another spot within your flock of chickens, and you are praising, not overly praising, but you are praising the behavior that you want to see. So I always at this point in time say to people, the very best thing that you can do for your livestock guardian dog is to give it basic job skills. It needs to know how to walk on a leash, and sit is one of the most valuable things that you can teach the dog to do, because when you start doing this poultry work, there's every chance that you walk into that flock with your adolescent and it acts like the Tasmanian devil on the end of a flexi lead at the dog park and starts going cuckoo town. And your first instinct is going to be to say, no, no, no. Well, that's great, but do you have something to redirect the dog to? So sit comes in super handy at this point, where you go in with the leash, the dog acts zany, you put the dog at sit, or you hold the dog up next to you, like at where a heel would be, and then the dog sits on its own and you say, good dog. And then you go back to sort of like this neutral position where you're basically kind of ignoring the dog. Once you get the dog to being quiet and calm on the leash, and this could take months, then you're going to graduate to a longer line. And again, I fall back to my horse world and I use a lunge line. They're pretty inexpensive. I use a cotton one because the nylon versions or anything that's got chain on it just has a tendency to behave differently if the dog starts kind of zipping around. And you want something that's going to be more weightless and remain in a pretty neutral position, not get snagged on things, because what you're trying to do with that long line is you're trying to sort of simulate what it's going to be like for when the dog has the freedom to walk among the flock and to behave appropriately among the flock. But if the dog behaves inappropriately, you still have a long line on it. And so you can correct that behavior without just having to be like, stop, Fluffy, don't touch him, Dakota or whatever. You are attached to that dog. The other thing that you really want to make sure you do before you go in and do any of this work, so I probably need to move this up in our little list here, is to make sure that you have a well-fitted collar on that dog. Nothing is more counterproductive than to have that dog wheel around and back out of the collar and then start zooming around in the birds. And if they unfortunately are able to engage in any type of self-rewarding behavior that unalives a bird, now you're back a step. So we like a flat martingale collar. Not a choke chain, just a flat martingale collar. You can get them off Amazon for like 10 or $12, maybe less than that. So this is a photo of Sam going in among the birds. And total honesty here, these birds are not worried about Sam, and Sam is being a really good boy, because I took this photo long after Sam had gotten pretty dependable with them. But your birds are always going to tattletale on your dog. So if your dog goes into the flock and is behaving in the least suspicious way and you're not sure about it, look at your birds. Watch your birds' behavior. Are your birds trying to figure out an exit strategy to get away from the dog? Are the birds fluttering? Are the birds scattering? The birds are always, always, always going to be a great mirror for whatever kind of energy the dog is putting out. So even if you're not sure about whether or not to correct your dog or settle your dog, watch your birds. Be observant about them. So real quick, just a story about Gilly. Gilly is a dog. And the reason that we include this in here is because a lot of times people do underestimate what it takes to do this poultry work. And then they underestimate what an adolescent livestock guardian dog can dish out. So Gilly was one of 2 dogs that were acquired from a local-ish breeder who's been breeding Anatolians for decades, as well as some herding and collie type dogs for decades. And he sold a pair of girls to some folks who took the girls home and threw them out on the farm and said, okay, genetics, lock in and do what you're supposed to do. And of course, the girls were great until the moment that they hit adolescence. And then they not only became codependent, but they started fighting with each other to draw blood. But then you would separate them because they were fighting, and then they were crying and whining and carrying on. They were feeding off of one another's bad behavior. They were killing chickens. And then when they killed a goat, their owner decided that she was going to kill them. So she overdosed them with some phenobarbital and Valium for 4 days straight, couldn't get the job done, and then contacted her veterinarian because she wanted to just run by and pick up a handy bottle of controlled ketamine and thought that would do the job, which it wouldn't have done it either. But the vet intervened, and the dogs ended up being taken by county animal control and sent here. We sent one dog to an experienced rehab person over towards the other end of the state, and Gilly stayed here. The reason that we talk about Gilly is because Gilly was allowed to engage in self-rewarding behavior for a really long time. She was almost a year old when she came here and had to have a come to Jesus meeting and get on track to guarding the poultry. And the total truth about Gilly is that Gilly had good days and bad days. And Gilly, we were never able to uninstall all of that self-rewarding software of going after the poultry. And so she was never able to work up to do poultry work dependably enough that we felt we could place her into a situation where she would guard poultry. So she is now actually moat guarding poultry with another Anatolian on a farm in the mountains of North Carolina, and she's doing great. But I tell this story to tell people, do not underestimate what these dogs can dish out in the way of naughty behaviors, not to anthropomorphize them. They're not doing this because they hate you or they want to wreck your life. They're just being idiot adolescents. And when they engage in behaviors that are self-rewarding, every time they escape, every time they unalive the chicken, every time they play a game of chase and train wreck something and send it off the rails, and it is fun, it is self-rewarding. And so that kind of becomes their addiction, is the self-rewarding aspect of whatever behavior it is. It is far easier to do this right the first time, get it, stick with the best practices right out of the gate, instead of having to go back and fix things that were installed wrong. I always like to just use a horse metaphor. It's a lot easier to get a horse that no one's ever put any training on than to get a horse in training that someone has, quote, trained on, and really they've just wrecked that horse. So that's the story about Gilly. So you can see her here in with the poultry, and this is after lots and lots of work. She's really, really interested in them. We always try to be fair, consistent, patient with the dogs. And we did that with her over and over and over again. This was last May, I think. And we had actually brought her here specifically for the previous presentation that we did, because it was sort of like, okay, can we make her up? We worked for months after this and we still weren't able to make her up. But you see how intense she is looking at that poultry, and there she is on that long line. And so she sits and she looks back at me and she's like, okay, am I doing the right thing now? Yeah, you're being a good girl, good girl. And then we just kind of go back to a neutral position of ignoring her. She never really kind of got to this. This is our goal. Our goal is that the dog just lays down. The long line is in a totally neutral position, and the dog is ignoring the poultry, and the poultry is ignoring the dog, and everything is happy-go-lucky. But this is your goal to see on the long line. Once you get your dog to the point where they are like this on the long line, and again, this could take months, and you may have, weeks where the dog is brilliant. You're just like, oh my gosh, I'm never having to correct this dog. And then who knows what happens? Maybe you wake up one morning and it's 42 degrees outside and it's brisk and clear and the dog is super excited, and then you regress a little bit. There's no set time limit on this. It depends on the dog. So, but this is your goal. When you start seeing this type of behavior from the dog, then you can start saying, okay, I'm going to put the dog in there unsupervised, and then see what you get. You may have to go back onto the long line, or the dog might get to the point where it can be off leash all the time. So what you're seeing here, again, this is a dog that is in with the poultry all the time, not on a long line, but I'm watching things all the time. The handle that is hanging off of this dog's collar is something that I always recommend to folks when these dogs are in training, especially, or if you have somebody coming over to farm sit for you. This is a great way to get your hands on a dog, is to grab that short little 8-inch or 12-inch piece of lead line that's attached to the collar without having to actually put your hands on the dog. If you've ever had to grab a dog by the collar, some of them do not take very kindly to that. It startles them or it freaks them out, thinking that they need to react to that. The other thing is that a lot of times when we are correcting our dogs, they are in a state of heightened emotions. They're wound up because they're going to go after the turkeys, or they're going after the guineas, or whatever it is. And then you reach and grab for that collar, and now you're part of the fray. So if you put that handle on the collar, it just is a nice way for you to get your hands on the dog without having to actually get your hands on the dog. But so this is what you're going to be seeing before you get to the point where you say, have a good day, Hazel, and you turn and walk away. So you can see this, and these are old photos of Joe. He's got his handle on and he's just kind of hanging out. And this is the behavior you want to see from the dog. The ears are down, the tail is relaxed, and look at the birds. If this was any kind of situation where this dog was misbehaving or putting out any sort of energy that he was fixing to launch into the flock or whatever, those birds are going to be tattletaling on him. So the birds are all quiet and relaxed. Everybody's happy to, have whatever meal this is that they're doing. So once you start seeing this kind of behavior really consistently, now you are headed towards success. So here's your unsupervised field work. And when I say unsupervised, that doesn't mean, hey, the dog's been really, really great, I'm just going to put him in the field and walk away, and not be observant. Make sure you are really observant over what's happening in that field when you would go to walk away. The dog is ignoring you, but you're sitting on your Kubota or whatever, a little ways off and kind of observing things. A couple of mentions here. Your fencing needs to keep your dog where you are wanting your dog to stay. Some people like to try and use invisible fencing. If you are out in a huge space and you want to try and use something like the spot on fencing, I'm wishing you the best of luck. Because these dogs do not bond to poultry, they are not going to necessarily be interested in hanging out with the poultry. In other words, if you've got dogs that are really well bonded to their goats and their sheep, and you have a tree fall on your fence or whatever, and your sheep or goats leave and the dog is bonded to them well, then the dog stays with them. They don't really work that way with poultry. The other thing about poultry is that generally most people are going to have them somehow confined. They're either going to be inside a fenced in area that is permanently fenced in, or they're going to have some kind of electro netting, and the birds are going to be in that. Your dog needs to be trained to that to stay with them. We like to start off unsupervised in the field by having the dog inside permanent fencing, and then have the chickens either inside the temporary fencing. So the dog it's almost like moat guarding, but it's not exactly, because the dog has the whole entire field, and then the poultry is contained within that electric fencing. Or we like to put the chickens in the tractor. So I think I mentioned on one slide back where when we move birds out of the brooder, we'll put them into the chicken tractor for a couple of days. And then the dog is like, oh, these are my new birds. And then we just open the door and the birds go wherever they want to, and the dog is out there with them. But when you're first moving your LGD out into the field with the poultry, the tractor and the electric fencing within that space just serves as an additional safety net while you're observing that dog and making sure that even though the dog seems to have been really safe, supervised, really dependable, that you still have kind of a little bit of a safety measure in place in case the dog goes off the rails a little bit. And then when you do a setup like this, that dog has all of that space around your chicken tractors, all of the space between your birds that are inside your premier fencing and the permanent fencing. So the dog is guarding the space and the birds by default. So here gives you an idea about how we sort of set things up here. This is my favorite thing, is the hoop house. You can build them for about $250. Less than that if you've got a bunch of junk laying around like we do. We like this one because we can walk inside to get the birds easily to harvest them. But we can also run layers in this outside of our broiler season. But you see our birds are inside, they're safe from the dog, they've got their food and their water, and then the dog can either be tethered to that, during the tethering period, or just loose around that tractor. And then once the birds graduate out to being in the field, you see these have the electronet around them. Hazel would have been outside of that when we were training her up. Gilly would have been outside of that when we were first moving her out into the field. She never kind of got that far. But this is going to take more patience and diligence, consistency. You have to be fair. You've got to set the dog up to have successful interactions with the birds, and just dedicate a lot of time to it. It's going to take a lot longer to do this in general than it is to do anything with sheep or goats. And there are outliers, and you will have a dog that you say, oh my God, we put him in with the chicks and the chickens and the ducks when he was 9 weeks old, and he's been perfect. He hasn't put a foot wrong. Those are your outliers. If you've got a mentor dog to put your puppies with, that can be super duper helpful. The dogs don't always correct a puppy that's harassing a chicken, because again, your dogs are generally not bonded to your chickens the way they are to your sheep or goats. So, going back and talking about moving these dogs out into the fields. And I'm sorry, this has been kind of a little bit all over the place here. When your poultry is out free ranging, and we've looked at this slide before, tethering your dog to the coop or some other permanent structure where the dog is in the immediate presence of that poultry, and where the poultry eats and where the poultry gets water, but the birds can scurry away. This is going to be a game changer in your training. So we always recommend to people that you just sort of replicate this setup, because it is so easy button as far as acclimating your dog to the chickens, and the chickens staying where you want them to stay, because the chickens are going to say, oh, this is my tractor. I eat in here. I drink in here. And this is going to be sort of their home base. Even the broilers who don't roost will come back to this little house at night and go in the house and sort of huddle up. And that way the dog and the chickens are occupying the same space, but the chickens again can get away. So this is what you're looking for right here. Not necessarily a dog on a picnic table, but this is our super fabulous Hazel, who is 100, and she's just 1,000% on poultry. She is brilliant. She's only got, I think, 100 birds out with her right now, but in a couple weeks, she will have about 750 birds out with her in a space that's it's not quite 2 acres. And she just hangs out there, and all of these birds do whatever they want to do. They go all over the place, and she is very easily able to manage that space. That's a very small space for a livestock guardian dog to have to manage. But birds don't necessarily stay together. And so sometimes, depending on your predator pressure, the birds will kind of scatter, and she likes to get up on her picnic table because it gives her a better view. So let me scoot through here real quick, because I've talked too much, and I'll need to leave you guys time for questions if you have any. And I'm sorry it's late in the day, and I'm tired. My brain doesn't work as well at the end of the day. But here's Hazel with some of her chickens. This is Petra. She is the queen of everything, but interesting to know, she is totally safe with adult birds. She does not do chicks. She likes to soft mouth pick up the chicks and put them in a place and try to keep them in a place. She doesn't like that they sort of wander around and make peeping noises. She never kills them. They just die of being, sort of manhandled, even though she's soft mouth picking them up. And here is Hazel with some Freedom Rangers. We raise those as well. And having her on duty, having all these dogs on duty is a total game changer, because like I said, our poultry, our pasture raised poultry, that's our bread and butter around here. So there's our happy dog. Again, boring. Birds are bored. Dog is bored. No kind of activity. You see all these different videos that are out in social media where the dogs are like alerting, and everything you see is like the dogs being like, oh, I've got to go get this predator. And the majority of the time, the dogs are doing a great potato imitation, because the predators know where your dogs are at any given time better than you do. And just the presence of the dogs, especially over a period of time, will alter the predator behavior around your farm to the degree that they don't even necessarily push the envelope. They're just like, oh yeah, the dogs and the birds are over here. Let me go over here and eat rabbits or try to catch mice or voles or whatever. So this is what your goal is right here. Everybody just chilling and doing a whole bunch of nothing. So this is who we are. Again, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. Shoot me an email. Use the contact form on our website. I stay really ridiculously busy. Right now, just totally swamped with rescue work and raising birds out, but happy to help in any way I can and clarify anything I've rambled on about. So Bill, if there's questions or anything I can clarify, I'm sure I have run through this a little haphazardly.
Oh, you're fine. Oh, does anybody have any questions they want to post into the chat? Or I can see if I can even unmute everybody.
I don't even know. I don't even see the chat. So, oh, wait a minute. There are 4 things in the chat, but I don't know what they are. I don't think they're questions for me. I think they're old questions from the beginning.
I could ask a question.
Yes.
I have he's about 1.5 years old. If he is tethered, he will not touch the poultry. They can lay right in front of his nose. The minute I lift him off his chain, though, like you said, he's like a stupid adolescent and will paw them and paw them and paw them until, like you said, they're just about dead.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest I do to help him transition so I don't have to tether him every day when I let the poultry free range?
Okay, so the fur mommy brigade is going to flip out when I say this, but he needs to stay tethered and get over himself. And
Okay.
sometimes seriously, sometimes it just takes forever. The other thing that I would suggest that you do is put him on a leash and ignore him. Walk into your flock of birds and ignore him, like just totally ignore him. Don't talk to him. Don't look to him. Don't pet him. Don't tell him how cute and perfect he is. You sit and you ignore him and give him some leeway on that leash. Like, you don't want him on a long line. You want to be able to really get after him and make it memorable. But so you don't want him too far away from you, but walk into that flock of birds and just ignore him. And if he is going to be silly and try to entertain himself, that's when you can, you better get off that bird, that bird's mine. And be really like vocally, like, don't put your hands on him. Don't snatch at him. Do not ever try to roll them. Don't do anything like that. But you can just, be vocally very like nasty, angry, growly at them and put him at a sit and start over again. And he's probably already good for you when you have him on the leash. He's probably fine on the long line. They know, he knows when he's off the tether and he knows when you can't correct him. And it's a game. And so really that's why a lot of people give up with the poultry, because it took me 1.5 years to make up Hazel to the point where I felt she was pretty darn trustworthy. And we didn't start with her on poultry until she was about 1 year old. She was a rescue dog that came here, and we were making her up to go onto a sheep farm, and we weren't going to be keeping her. We ended up keeping her because I had a fox get into a tractor of chicks that were 4 weeks old and leave with all of them. And that's why we decided, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to have something that's going to be a little more poultry specific. So she was a solid 2.5 years old before I was like, okay, you're going to be trustworthy. So I hate to say it, but like, become a member.
Keep working with them. Just keep working with them.
Yeah, you just really, and you're going to be like, this is not getting any better. This is not getting any better. I'm going to order right, more cardboard for everyone. And then it's crazy, but I promise you, with some of these dogs, again, they never make up, but some of these dogs, it's like all of a sudden one day they're like, well, that was a dumb game and I'm not doing it anymore. And they never look at another bird again. They're perfect.
Okay.
So I wish I had a easy button answer, but that's why so many people give up so quick with the poultry work, and I shouldn't say so quick, because this probably feels like it's been going on for forever and ever and ever.
No, it's just, we want to free range everything we possibly can. And he's out in the pasture. He needs to respect those birds, because I'm getting ready to transfer my peafowl out there too. And hate to say it, he kills a $500 bird. Yep, I might want to kill him too.
Yes.
So, it's one of those things. He has to respect the chickens and the turkeys. And like you said, the turkeys are dumb. They jump out of their pen every day. So like every day, it's the same thing. I go back there and find one of them pod.
I'm sorry, I mean to interrupt. Do you have a way that you can set him up in a moat so that you can put the birds, or maybe even a select group of birds, within some electric fencing, and then he would be able to kind of free range outside of them? I mean, I wouldn't put my most expensive birds in there.
I could during the day, because right now during the day he's tethered. Like literally, I tether him about 3 feet. Like there's 3 feet between the opening of the poultry's pen and where he is, so the poultry can still get in their pen during the day if they want. And he won't touch them. The minute I walk out in the morning, he goes right to his chain because he knows what I'm going to do. He sits down, I chain him, I give him some love, and then I go about my morning opening everything up. He won't mess with any of them. But the minute I take him off the chain, if there's one out, he finds it. He'll
So
find it.
where is he at night when you said you take him
He
out?
has the whole free pasture. He's free to
Okay,
do
I
the whole
gotcha.
pasture because we have 40 acres and the coyotes, you name it, we got it.
Right,
So, and right now there's corn planted around the fenced in pasture part, so we can't even see what's coming up.
right,
Where like last year it was beans, and if there was coyotes coming up, he would be barking at the fence line before they even made it a third of the way up to the pasture.
right,
So
right.
yeah,
So we
he
just,
has the whole free pasture.
So you're really just playing a game of patience and time with him.
Okay.
I mean, that's really basically what you're doing is you've just got to get them. And I hate to I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the Karakachan took 3 years.
Oh,
I mean, he's 3 years old, and it took 3 years to get him to the point where he is not like, oh, look at this toy. And seriously, he was just kind of like, one day he was like, okay,
enough.
I'm not going to do this anymore. And a rooster moved into his space with him and became like his bed. It was the craziest thing ever. I do find that the boys generally with everything, the boys just take longer than the girls do. But
if I add another guardian dog out to the pasture, because right now there's probably about 7 acres fenced in, and this year we're done with the lease, so we're gonna fence in probably about 25 acres, and I want to add another guardian dog because obviously one is not enough for that much area.
right.
Would you say wait until he's over this phase of the birds, or come spring? Do you think it would be okay? He'd be about 2 then.
What else do you have? I mean, do you have anything else out there that needs to be guarded right now other than the birds?
We have pigs and we have rabbits that are in tractors that if something got back there, they could obviously get in the tractors to the rabbits. Next year, I want to add goats out there too, once I have more space.
If I added a dog, let's say that your predator load was such that you really need to add a dog. You've added the fladry. I mean, like, honestly, you can have all of those other deterrents in addition to the dog. And I would always recommend that folks do all of those deterrents in addition to a young dog, because it helps your young dog to grow up and be able to grow up confidently because they're not getting overfaced when they're young. If you had to add another dog, I would find an adult dog. I would not add another puppy right now.
At what age would you add another puppy?
I would, it would depend on how well he was doing, but not until he was probably at least 2 years old. The problem that you're probably facing right now, and again, like, and I'm not sure where you are located or
We're in
what
Michigan.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So you're probably in worse shape than we are here because our summer apparently is going to go on for the rest of my whole entire life. Are we ever going to have winter here again? I don't know. But in the fall, we see coyote dispersal. And so we will have certain predators start trying to kind of figure life out, and they will be pushing in. Everything is hungry during the starving months. They will start pushing in. So it sounds kind of crazy for me to say, don't add another dog right now when your predator pressure is probably fixing to increase. But if you add another puppy right now, that puppy is going to do absolutely nothing to increase like your guarding presence. That puppy basically just is a liability because it can't guard. So
yeah, I was thinking of waiting until spring from talking to someone else in one of the Facebook groups because they had said that what I was going through. He goes, usually about 2, they'll get out of that phase. So he'll be 2 in March. So my thought was is next spring look to add another guardian because hopefully by then he's out of that stage and he can teach the little one to do things the right way.
Yeah. So. I mean, and that would be what I would do here. And whatever, I always recommend to folks that when you start building your pack, alternate genders, especially if you start off with a female. Do not get 2 females that are close in age. There are always people who say, oh, my girls love each other. And I always say, well, I'm so excited for you. But most of the girls, if you raised daughters, you know, once they decide they're hard. So yeah, I mean, maybe add add a female in the spring, and hopefully he will be over his silliness by then. But yeah, it's just time. But you're doing everything right. I mean, it's just time.
All right. No, I just, you know, like you said, it does. It's been almost a year of this now. Like when he was a puppy, he wouldn't touch him. And then all of a sudden he got in a phase where, hey, this is fun. And I'm like, what are you doing? You know? And like
And
I said,
I mean, I use
the
this
chickens will lay
analogy.
right next to him when he's on that tether, and he will not budge. He don't care. But the
No,
minute he's off that
they
tether,
know.
it's like, what? I don't get it. And that was baffling me of why he wouldn't touch him on the tether, but he goes after him when he's free.
They know.
The
And
breed.
the adolescent livestock guardian dog is sort of like a 15-year-old that is hopped up, has been shotgunning Red Bull and stolen dad's keys to the classic Chevelle and has a couple of friends in tow. They just make bad decisions, and then they compound those bad decisions anytime they are able to successfully engage in self-rewarding behavior. So it really is time and patience. And I wish that I had some kind of like magic button.
No, that was helpful, because now I know, just keep doing what I'm doing and keep, because that was when you were talking. I'm like, you know what, when I go out at night, I think I'm going to start, I'll put the leash on him and make him sit with me while we're corralling all the poultry back into the pen, and make him just sit there with me and get him to learn to just chill. Because that was my thought when you were talking.
Yeah.
Just keep working with him a little more and getting him in there a little closer.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I see something, the non-electric training collars. I found Okay, so here's my thoughts on any of these training collars. Anything, whether it's squirting stuff in their face, whether it's making a sound, whether it's zapping them. I have no problem whatsoever with like a sport dog fence or something like a spot on any of these collars that are reacting to like a fixed and dependable location, or a fixed and dependable anything. But anything that requires our timing, I don't want to be like, oh, I don't support that. I'm sure that it can work in some, because you say here that it was really helpful with your dog's training. Maybe depending on kind of like what it is that you're trying to train with the dog, like what are you trying to get them to do? It has the possibility of being successful, but one of the things that we see with the use of the electric collars, and so I'm not sure how the citronella would necessarily sort of figure in with this, but people had started using the electric collars, and they would hide while they were watching the dog interact with the birds. And then when the dog would go after the bird, they would shock the dog. And you basically are sort of training the dog kind of to hate the birds and to avoid the birds, but not in a good way, in a respectful way. So I'm not really, as far as the citronella ones go, that's different from that painful zap. So I don't know that I really have an opinion on the citronella ones, but I would say that anything that depends upon our timing, it is only effective if our timing is perfect. So I always tell folks, please steer clear of any of the electric collars, the zappy collars. What we have seen in rescue in the past, I guess it's probably been maybe the last year, we've seen peers that have gone into situations where people have depended on those collars, and it has created a dog that sort of lived in the rage cage, because they knew that they were wearing that collar, and they knew that there was probably going to be some sort of negative reinforcement that was going to be painful, and they couldn't do anything about it. So it just sort of changed that. I'm trying to read this here to break his fixation on it rather than jerking him back. I was out of sight. Gotcha. So, the citronella, because it's not, it's more of an unpleasant something. I have not ever really used one of those. So, okay. So he's associating it with the beep and then the citronella. I haven't ever really used one of the citronella ones. So I don't have a perspective about, I know it sort of sprays up into their face or makes this cloud of stuff. I might be a little old school, but it's probably not something that I would do. And if it works, if it works for you, I would just say be very, very judicious in the use of those. I don't use them. I don't tell people that I feel like they should be using them. But I do, trust me, I get the frustration level sometimes, especially with the poultry, because it's just like, oh my God, we've done the same thing 500 days in a row now. Why can't you get this? And then one day they're like, yeah, I'm not going to do any bird unaliving anymore. And you're just like, why couldn't you do this 300 days ago? But anyway.
Well, folks, does anybody else have any other questions, either in the chat or want to unmute?
So I hope this was helpful. And if you guys, again, if you have any questions or you run into any stumbling blocks when you're out there trying to convince your fluffy little snookums to stop harassing the birds and actually start guarding them, you're more than welcome to shoot me a message or an email. Sometimes I will get a wild hair and do a little video of something that we're doing with the dogs here. That doesn't usually happen this time of year. That happens more like in the wintertime. Or if I have a rescue dog here that's learning something specific, and that might be helpful. But we do a lot of poultry work because we do a lot of poultry. So thank y'all so much for having me. I hope it was helpful.
Well, we sure appreciate it, Joy. It was an excellent presentation again, and thank you for taking some time out to do it again for the Texas Guard Dog Association.
Absolutely, and best wishes to y'all. Thanks so much.
You too. Well, thank you, everybody. If you didn't catch the whole presentation today, we will have it on our Texas Livestock Guardian Dog Association YouTube channel as soon as I can get it posted. So probably give me a day or two, and we'll get that posted to the channel. But we do have a YouTube channel now, so it'll show up there with a couple other videos that we've already had. So thank you very much, everybody, for logging in today. And again, Joy, thank you for your time. Check back with us. We'll have another webinar probably sometime in the early spring from the Guard Dog Association here in Texas. Thank you, everybody, for logging in. Bye-bye.
Bye.